Alexandra's hand trembled with rage as the billionaire's German insults sliced through her professional composure. Unaware she understood every vicious word, her calm, flawless response in his mother tongue drained the color from his face and transformed a moment of humiliation into the opportunity of a lifetime. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The Königshof Hotel's restaurant gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each facet reflecting wealth and privilege like a mirror. This was Klaus Bergman's kingdom, not by ownership, but by the sheer gravitational pull of his billions. The German tech magnate had commandeered the finest table in the establishment for his business dinner, surrounded by a constellation of executives and potential investors who orbited him like eager satellites. At 58, Bergman carried his wealth like armor. His steel-gray hair was precisely cut, his navy Tom Ford suit impeccably tailored to disguise the slight paunch he'd developed from too many business dinners. His face, angular and weathered by decades of ruthless deals, rarely displayed emotion beyond calculated amusement or strategic displeasure. "Gentlemen," he announced, his accent thick but his English fluent, "tonight we toast to the future of Bergman Industries in America." He raised his glass, eyes moving from face to face around the table, assessing each person's value to his expanding empire with the cold calculation of a chess master. Among those gathered were Jonathan Pierce and David Cho, representatives from Horizon Ventures, Melissa Tanner, a sharp-eyed investment banker known for her ruthlessness in acquisition deals, and three of Bergman's own executives who had flown in from Berlin specifically for this meeting. The eighth chair remained conspicuously empty. Senator William Crawford had called to say he was running 15 minutes late. "The senator's tardiness is telling," Bergman muttered to his CFO in German. "These Americans think their time is more valuable than ours." The conversation flowed like the expensive wine being poured into crystal glasses. Market projections, potential regulatory hurdles, and competitive advantages were discussed with practiced enthusiasm. Bergman controlled the room with the precision of a conductor, skillfully redirecting conversations whenever they strayed from his carefully planned agenda. It was during the appetizer course when Alexandra Keller approached their table. At 28, she carried herself with the poised confidence of someone twice her age. Her black suit was modest but perfectly fitted, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She'd been working at the Königshof for only 6 months, but had quickly earned a reputation for unflappable professionalism. "Good evening," she said with a warm smile that reached her deep brown eyes. "I'll be your server tonight. May I tell you about our chef's specials?" Bergman barely glanced at her, offering a dismissive wave. "We've already ordered. Just keep the wine flowing." He turned back to the conversation, effectively dismissing her from his awareness. Alexandra nodded professionally. "Of course, sir. I'll check on your table regularly." As she moved around the table, refilling water and wine glasses, Bergman continued his business discussion. The wine was flowing freely, and with it, his careful composure began to slip. Senator Crawford still hadn't arrived, and Bergman's irritation was mounting. Alexandra approached to clear some empty appetizer plates, moving efficiently around the table. As she reached for Bergman's plate, her elbow accidentally brushed against his shoulder. "I apologize, sir," she said immediately, withdrawing with practiced grace. Bergman stiffened, his conversation halting mid-sentence. He looked at her as if truly seeing her for the first time, his eyes narrowing with displeasure. "Watch yourself," he said coldly. "Yes, sir. It won't happen again," Alexandra replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. The moment should have ended there, but Bergman, perhaps emboldened by wine and the sycophantic attention of his companions, turned to his CFO and switched to German. "This Denang squish so ungeschickt VCHBSCH," he said with a smirk. "Wahrscheinlich hat sie ihren Job nur bekommen, weil sie gut aussieht. Typisch amerikanischer Service-incompetent, aber mit einem falschen Lakin." The CFO chuckled obligingly. Melissa Tanner, who didn't understand German, smiled politely, assuming they were sharing some benign observation. Jonathan Pierce looked uncomfortably at his plate, while David Cho sipped his wine, his expression carefully neutral. Alexandra continued clearing plates, her face betraying nothing, but she had heard every word. "This waitress is as clumsy as she is pretty. She probably only got her job because she looks good. Typical American service, incompetent, but with a fake smile." Bergman, satisfied with his little joke, returned to English. "Now, as I was saying before it being interrupted, the European market share projections for the third quarter, ... Alexandra finished clearing the appetizer plates and retreated to the kitchen. She moved with practiced efficiency, but inside a storm was brewing. 6 years of studying German at university, a year abroad, and 3 years working for a German company before returning to finish her MBA, all culminating in this moment. Hearing herself dismissed as nothing more than decorative incompetence by a man who didn't realize she understood every word. In the kitchen, the head chef noticed her expression. "Everything okay out there, Alex?" She nodded, her professional mask firmly in place. "Table 8 is running low on the Bordeaux, and I need to put in the main course order for table 12. The kitchen was a controlled chaos of clattering pans and shouted instructions, so different from the hushed reverence of the dining room. Alexandra took a moment to center herself. She thought of her grandfather, who had escaped East Germany with nothing but his wits and determination, who had built a new life in America through hard work and dignity. What would he think of how she handled this situation? When the main courses were ready, Alexandra returned to Bergman's table with a tray of elegantly plated dishes. Senator Crawford had finally arrived, full of apologies and handshakes. The mood had lightened considerably. "Ah, finally the food arrives," Bergman announced, his mood improved by the senator's presence. Let's hope it's better than the service." Alexandra began placing each plate in front of its respective diner with the precision of a surgeon. When she reached Bergman, she set down his plate of Wiener Schnitzel with particular care. "Your Schnitzel, sir," she said in perfect accent-free German. "I took special care with your order, as I would never want to be seen as clumsy or incompetent." The table fell instantly silent. Bergman's fork clattered against his plate, his face frozen in shock. His CFO choked slightly on his wine. The Americans at the table, not understanding what had been said but clearly sensing the sudden tension, looked between Alexandra and Bergman with confused expressions. Bergman's face reddened. Whether from embarrassment or anger was difficult to tell. "You speak German," he said flatly in English. "Fleißend," Alexandra replied. "Fluently. I studied at Heidelberg University and worked for Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt before returning to complete my MBA." She maintained perfect eye contact, her voice level and professional. "I'll return shortly to check on your meals. Guten Appetit." As she walked away, she could feel every eye at the table following her. Behind her, she heard Melissa Tanner ask, "What just happened?" Alexandra continued her shift with consummate professionalism, returning to the table periodically to refill glasses and ensure everything was to their satisfaction. Bergman barely looked at her, suddenly deeply engaged in conversation with the senator. His earlier swagger had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. When dessert menus were offered, Bergman declined on behalf of the table. "Just the check," he said curtly, avoiding Alexandra's eyes. She nodded. "Of course, sir." When she returned with the leather folder containing the bill, Bergman reached for it without looking at her. The amount was staggering over $4,000, but such sums were meaningless to a man of his wealth as he signed the credit card receipt. Alexandra noticed he had added a 20% tip, generous, but not exceptional for a bill of that size. His signature was a harsh scrawl across the bottom of the paper. "Thank you for dining with us tonight," she said as she collected the signed receipt. Then, switching to German one final time, she added, "Ich wünsche Ihnen viel Erfolg bei Ihren Geschäften in Amerika, Herr Bergman. Mögen Sie von anderen mit demselben Respekt behandelt werden, den Sie Ihnen entgegenbringen. I wish you much success in your business dealings in America. Mr. Bergman, may you be treated by others with the same respect you show them." His head snapped up, eyes meeting hers for the first time since her revelation. Something flickered across his face, perhaps recognition, perhaps respect, perhaps simply surprise that she would dare address him again. The others at the table, sensing another exchange they couldn't understand, watched with undisguised curiosity. After a tense moment, Bergman gave a single curt nod. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement of her dignity, of her refusal to be diminished. In his world of yes-men and sycophants, such quiet defiance was rare enough to command notice. As the party rose to leave, Alexandra heard Melissa Tanner ask Bergman what had happened. His reply was inaudible, but his shoulders carried a tension that hadn't been there when they arrived. Back in the kitchen, the head chef raised an eyebrow at her. "So, how did the Billionaire Boys Club tip?" Alexandra allowed herself a small smile. 20%, and a lesson in assumptions. Later that night, as she counted her tips and prepared to head home, Alexandra's phone buzzed with a notification. An email from an unfamiliar address had appeared in her inbox. The subject line read, "Impressive service job opportunity." She opened it curiously. "Ms. Keller," it began, "your handling of a difficult situation tonight demonstrated exceptional poise and intelligence. Such qualities are rare and valuable. If you would be interested in discussing career opportunities with Horizon Ventures, I would be pleased to meet with you at your convenience. Jonathan Pierce, Senior Partner." Alexandra smiled to herself. Perhaps Bergman's arrogance would end up opening doors rather than closing them. She tucked her phone away and headed for the subway, her grandfather's voice echoing in her memory. "In America, respect isn't given because of who you are, but because of how you act." Tonight she had earned it. The morning after the incident, Alexandra woke to find 3 more emails in her inbox. One from Melissa Tanner at First Capital Partners, another from Senator Crawford's chief of staff, and a third, most surprisingly, from Otto Weber, Bergman's CFO. Each message contained variations on the same theme. They were impressed with her composure and language skills, and they wanted to talk. Alexandra sat on the edge of her bed in her small studio apartment, coffee mug in hand, staring at her phone in disbelief. 24 hours ago, she had been just another server working her way through the final year of her MBA program. Now, executives from companies she had only read about in business case studies were reaching out directly. Her roommate Rachel emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, hair dripping. "Why are you looking at your phone like it might explode?" Alexandra handed it to her. Rachel scrolled through the emails, her eyes widening. "Holy shit, Alex. Is this because of the German billionaire jerk?" "Apparently." Rachel handed the phone back with a grin. "So which one are you going to meet?" "All of them." Alexandra replied, already calculating how to fit these meetings around her classes and shift, starting with Jonathan Pierce. 2 hours later, Alexandra sat in the sleek reception area of Horizon Ventures' Midtown office. The walls were adorned with framed headlines documenting the firm's most successful investments. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city that made her feel simultaneously small and filled with possibility. "Miss Keller?" A receptionist appeared at her elbow. "Mr. Pierce will see you now." Jonathan Pierce's office was minimalist: desk, ergonomic chair, and a single piece of abstract art on the wall. The man himself rose to greet her, his handshake firm but not aggressive. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I imagine you've received several similar invitations since last night." Alexandra nodded. "I have. May I ask why you accepted mine first?" She met his gaze directly. "During the dinner, you were the only one who looked uncomfortable when Mr. Bergman made his comment." "You didn't laugh along," Pierce nodded, looking pleased with her observation. "Bergman is brilliant but deeply flawed. His casual disrespect for service workers is just one manifestation of a larger character issue." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about your background, Alexandra. Not the resume version, I've already seen that. Tell me what drives you." For the next hour, they talked. Alexandra told him about her grandfather's escape from East Germany, her childhood fascination with languages, her determination to understand global business from multiple perspectives. Pierce listened intently, occasionally asking insightful questions that revealed he was genuinely evaluating her potential. "We have an associate position opening in our international acquisitions team," he said finally. "The salary is competitive, the hours are brutal, and the learning curve is steep, but you'd be working directly with companies like Bergman's from the other side of the table. I still have 6 months of my MBA to complete," Alexandra pointed out. Pierce waved this away. "Part-time role until you graduate, then full transition. We can work around your schedule." As Alexandra left the building, her mind was spinning with possibilities. The offer was exactly what she had been working toward: a foot in the door at a prestigious firm, doing work that mattered, with compensation that would finally allow her to pay off her student loans. But 3 more meetings awaited her, and she was determined to hear every option before making a decision. Melissa Tanner's approach was more direct than Pierce's. They met at an upscale coffee shop, and Tanner wasted no time on pleasantries. "I need someone who speaks fluent German and understands banking for a merger we're working on," she said, stirring her espresso. "The position would be temporary, 6 months, possibly extending to a year. But the exposure would be invaluable, and the pay would make your student debt disappear overnight." Senator Crawford's chief of staff, a hurried-looking woman named Patricia Gomez, offered yet another path. "The senator was impressed by your poise," she explained during their meeting in a crowded congressional office. "We're putting together a trade delegation to the EU next quarter, and we need someone with both language skills and business acumen to join the team. It would be a 3-month contract with the possibility of extension." By the time Alexandra arrived for her final meeting with Otto Weber, she was overwhelmed with options. She had expected the CFO to be as arrogant as Bergman, but the man who greeted her at a quiet tea house was surprisingly humble. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said in German, his voice softer than it had been at the dinner. "I wanted to apologize for not intervening when Herr Bergman spoke so disrespectfully." Alexandra responded in the same language. "You were in a difficult position." Weber nodded, stirring his tea. "I have been in that position for 15 years. Too long, perhaps." He studied her face. "Herr Bergman does not know I am meeting with you. What happened last night, ... It's made me realize some things about the company culture I have helped create through my silence." "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Weber?" Alexandra asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Bergman Industries is expanding its American operation. We need someone who understands both cultures. Someone who won't be intimidated by Klaus, someone like you." Alexandra raised an eyebrow. "To do what exactly? Teach sensitivity training?" Weber actually laughed. "No, nothing so direct. We need a cultural liaison in our business development team. Someone to help us avoid ... missteps. Like last night, working directly with Mr. Bergman. Yes, he would not make it easy for you, but he respects competence even when it challenges him." Weber leaned forward. "Perhaps especially when it challenges him." That night, Alexandra spread 4 job offers across her tiny kitchen table while Rachel poured them each a glass of wine. "So what's it going to be?" Rachel asked. "Venture capital, investment banking, government, or the Dragon's Lair itself?" Alexandra took a sip of wine, considering. "Each offer has its advantages and its downsides," Rachel pointed out. "Working for Crawford means politics and bureaucracy. Tanner would work you to death for that paycheck. Pierce seems decent, but venture capital is cutthroat." She picked up Weber's business card. "And this one means dealing with the man who publicly insulted you." Alexandra nodded, thinking about her grandfather again. He hadn't escaped one authoritarian system just to bow to others. He had taught her that true respect came from standing your ground, especially when it was difficult. "I need to sleep on it," she said finally. The decision came to her in the early hours of the morning. By 6 a.m., she had drafted 4 emails. 3 were polite declinations expressing gratitude for the opportunity. The 4th was an acceptance. 3 days later, Alexandra stood in the lobby of Bergman Industries' newly established American headquarters. The security guard checked her ID and handed her a visitor's badge. 35th floor, he directed. "Mr. Weber is expecting." The elevator ride gave her time to second-guess her decision. Was she walking into a trap? A setup for further humiliation? Or was this truly the opportunity it appeared to be? Otto Weber was waiting when the elevator doors opened. "Welcome, Alexandra. Let me show you around before the meeting." As they walked through the office, Weber pointed out various departments and introduced key personnel. The space was immaculate, the technology cutting edge, the employees focused and efficient. It was exactly what one would expect from a German precision engineering firm. "Klaus is in the conference room," Weber said fine, pausing outside a glass-walled space where Bergman sat reviewing documents with several executives. "Are you ready?" Alexandra straightened her jacket. "Yes." Heads turned as they entered, conversation halting mid-sentence. Bergman looked up, his face registering recognition and then something unreadable. "Herr Bergman," Weber said in German, "may I introduce Alexandra Keller, our new cultural liaison for American operations." Bergman studied her for a long moment. The others around the table watched nervously, clearly aware of their previous encounter. "Ms. Keller," Bergman said finally, switching to English, "you have made quite an impression." His tone was neutral, giving away nothing. "That was my intention, Mr. Bergman," she replied evenly. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone waited for Bergman's reaction. Would he erupt in anger at her audacity? Dismiss her on the spot? Instead, his mouth quirked in what might almost have been a smile. "Good. Perhaps you will help ensure that I make the right kind of impression in the future." He gestured to an empty chair. "Join us." We were discussing the launch event for our new manufacturing facility. As Alexandra took her seat, she felt the weight of every gaze in the room. She had chosen the most difficult path, working directly with the man who had dismissed her, rather than opposing him from a safe distance. It would be challenging, possibly even dangerous to her career if it went wrong. But as the meeting progressed, she realized she had made the right choice. Here she could affect real change. Here she could turn a moment of disrespect into a catalyst for transformation, not just for herself, but for everyone who worked under Bergman's demanding leadership. "We need to understand the American perspective," Bergman was saying. "Their expectations are different from our European clients." Alexandra saw her opening. "May I offer a suggestion, Mr. Bergman?" He nodded, his expression still guarded but attentive. "Americans value authenticity over formality," she began, articulating the first of many cultural insights she would bring to this role. The launch event should reflect that. As she outlined her proposal, Alexandra felt something unexpected, genuine excitement. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to build bridges between worlds she understood intimately, and perhaps in the process, to teach an arrogant billionaire that respect wasn't just something you demanded, but something you earned. The true test of her decision would unfold in the weeks and months ahead, but for now, sitting at the table where decisions were made rather than serving those who made them, Alexandra knew she had turned a moment of insult into an opportunity for impact. Sometimes the perfect reply wasn't just a clever comeback, it was rewriting the entire conversation. The first month at Bergman Industries tested Alexandra's resolve daily. The sleek glass and steel office building became a battlefield where each interaction with Klaus Bergman felt like a strategic maneuver. The man was brilliant, but mercurial, generous with praise when impressed, ruthlessly critical when disappointed, and always watching for weakness. Alexandra's role as cultural liaison placed her in a precarious position. She needed to correct Bergman's cultural missteps without undermining his authority, advise without condescending, and earn respect without appearing to seek it. It was a delicate balance that left her exhausted at the end of each day. He rejected the entire marketing proposal, groaned Michael Chun, the American marketing director, collapsing into the chair opposite Alexandra's desk. 3 weeks of work down the drain because, and I quote, "It lacks German precision while simultaneously missing American dynamism." Alexandra sighed. She'd warned the marketing team that their approach was too casual for Bergman's taste, but not bold enough for the American market they were targeting. "Send me the materials. I'll review them and help you recalibrate." "That's not all," Michael continued, lowering his voice. He said, "If we can't get this right, perhaps we should outsource to a competent agency in Berlin." The implied threat to American jobs was exactly the kind of misstep that could damage Bergman's reputation in the business community and with his local workforce. This was precisely why Alexandra had been hired. "Let me handle this," she said, already planning her approach. She found Bergman in his corner office, scowling at his computer screen. His desk was immaculate, not a paper out of place. His suit as perfectly pressed at 4 p.m. as it had been at 8 a.m. "Herr Bergman, do you have a moment to discuss the marketing proposal?" she asked from the doorway, deliberately using German. He looked up, his scowl deepening. "The incompetence of that department is not worth discussing. They will either improve or be replaced." Alexandra stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "May I speak frankly?" Something flickered in Bergman's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. Few people asked his permission to be direct. "Please do," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Threatening to outsource American jobs to Germany undermines everything we're trying to accomplish here." Alexandra kept her tone respectful but firm. "It creates resentment, damages morale, and will eventually reach the business press, who will paint you as exactly the kind of foreign executive Americans distrust." Bergman's expression darkened. "So I should accept mediocrity to appease American sensitivities?" "No," Alexandra replied. "You should demand excellence while understanding cultural differences and how that excellence manifests." She placed her tablet on his desk and pulled up the rejected marketing material. "The issue isn't that this work lacks quality, it's that it doesn't align with your specific expectations. For the next 30 minutes, Alexander walked Bergman through a detailed analysis of how German and American marketing approaches differed, where the current proposal fell short from both perspectives, and how it could be salvaged without starting from scratch. She was meticulous in her critique, knowing that Bergman respected thorough analysis above all else. As she spoke, she watched his expression shift from dismissive to considering. "You've given this considerable thought," he said when she finished. "It's my job to bridge these gaps," Alexandra replied simply. Bergman studied her for a long moment. "Very well. Work with Chun to revise the proposal along these lines. You have 1 week." It wasn't gratitude or an apology for his threat, but it was progress. As Alexandra rose to leave, Bergman added, "And Ms. Keller, I expect you to personally present the revised material." It was both an opportunity and a test. "Of course, Miss Bergman." The next week was a blur of late nights and early mornings as Alexandra worked with Michael's team to rebuild the marketing strategy. She pushed them to incorporate the precision Bergman valued while enhancing the bold, innovative elements that would resonate with American consumers. On the day of the presentation, Alexandra entered the conference room to find not just Bergman but the entire executive team waiting. Otto Weber gave her an encouraging nod, but the others watched with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. "Ms. Keller," Bergman said, his voice carrying that distinct note of challenge, "show us what cultural liaison actually means in practice." Alexandra took a deep breath and began. She had structured the presentation to appeal to Bergman's analytical mind, starting with market research, moving through strategic positioning, and culminating in a creative approach that was both bold and precise. She presented entirely in German for the first half, switching seamlessly to English for the second to emphasize the bicultural nature of the campaign. When she finished, the room was silent. Bergman's expression was unreadable as he studied the final slide displaying the tagline, "German Precision, American Possibility." "Bergman? Questions?" Alexandra prompted, refusing to let the silence intimidate her. "It's a significant improvement," Bergman admitted finally. "Though I'm curious why you chose to retain elements I specifically criticized in the original version. It was a trap test to see if she would back down. Because those elements weren't flawed in concept, only in execution," Alexandra replied. "American consumers respond to aspirations and emotion, even when purchasing precision engineering products. Removing those elements entirely would have been an overcorrection." Bergman's mouth twitched in what might almost have been amusement. "Bold of you to presume you understand what I want better than I do." "Not at all," Alexandra countered. "I simply recognize that what you asked for and what you need might be slightly different things. My job is to deliver the latter." A tense silence followed. The other executives looked between them like spectators at a tennis match, waiting to see who would concede first. To everyone's surprise, Bergman laughed, a short, genuine sound that seemed to startle even him. "Approved," he said, standing abruptly. "Implemented immediately. Weber, let's discuss production timelines." As the meeting dispersed, Michael caught Alexandra's eye across the room, giving her a discreet thumbs up. She had won this battle, but the war for Bergman's respect was far from over. That evening, as Alexandra was preparing to leave, Weber appeared at her office door. "Impressive work today," he said, his voice low. "Few people challenge Klaus and survive, let alone prevail." Alexandra looked up from her computer. "I wasn't trying to challenge him, I was trying to help him succeed." Weber nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's why it worked. But be careful, Klaus doesn't always recognize allies from adversaries. Is that a warning, Mr. Weber?" Let's call it friendly advice," he replied. "Klaus is hosting a dinner for our German board members tomorrow night at his penthouse. He's requested your presence." Alexandra felt a flutter of uncertainty. The dinner would be her first social interaction with Bergman outside the office. "What should I expect?" "The unexpected," Weber said with a small smile. "Klaus enjoys testing people in different environments. Just remember, everything is business with him, even when it appears social." The following evening, Alexandra arrived at Bergman's penthouse precisely at 7. The doorman escorted her to a private elevator that opened directly into a stunning apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The decor was minimalist but luxurious, all clean lines, neutral colors, and subtle displays of wealth. Bergman greeted her at the elevator, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit that looked casual only by comparison to his office attire. "Ms. Keller, welcome. Thank you for inviting me." "Mr. Bergman," she replied, handing him the bottle of German Riesling she had brought, a small courtesy she knew would be appreciated. He examined the label with approval. "An excellent vintage. You know your German wines. I spent a year in the Rheingau region during my studies," she explained. Bergman led her through to a spacious living area where 8 men stood conversing in German. Alexandra recognized several from photographs and business publications. The chairman of Bergman Industries, the head of R&D, and several board members whose combined wealth could probably purchase a small country. "Gentlemen," Bergman announced, switching to German, "allow me to introduce Alexandra Keller, our cultural liaison for American operation." All eyes turned to assess her. Alexandra could read the questions in their expressions. Why was a young American woman at this gathering of German industrial titans? What power did she hold to merit such an invitation? She greeted each man in flawless German, demonstrating not only language fluency but cultural awareness in her manner of address. By the time they moved to the dining room, she had begun to earn cautious approval from at least half the group. The dinner itself was exquisite, traditional German dishes with modern interpretations served with military precision by silent, efficient staff. The conversation flowed in German exclusively, ranging from European politics to engineering innovations to art acquisition. Alexandra participated when addressed directly but otherwise observed carefully. She noticed how Bergman controlled the conversation's direction, how he used subtle signals, a raised eyebrow, a slight hand gesture to indicate when a topic should be abandoned or pursued. It was during dessert when the chairman, Heinrich Wahler, turned his attention directly to her. Fräulein Keller, he began, his tone vaguely condescending. Klaus tells me you were working as a waitress when you met. Quite a dramatic career change, wouldn't you say? The table quieted, all eyes turning to her. It was a deliberate attempt to put her in her place, to remind everyone of her humble beginnings. Alexandra met his gaze steadily. Not at all, Herr Wahler. In both roles, my job is to anticipate needs, solve problems, and ensure satisfaction, often without receiving direct instructions or gratitude. She smiled pleasantly. The main difference is that as a waitress, the customers were occasionally more polite. A shocked silence fell over the table, followed by a burst of surprised laughter from the R&D director. Bergman's expression remained neutral, but Alexandra caught a glimmer of something like approval in his eyes. A fair assessment, Bergman said, raising his wineglass slightly in her direction. As the evening concluded and the guests departed, Bergman held Alexandra back with a subtle gesture. You navigated that well, he said when they were alone, particularly Heinrich's attempt to undermine you. Thank you, Alexandra replied, though I suspect you anticipated his approach. Bergman's expression revealed nothing. Perhaps, just as I suspected you would handle it effectively. Was that the test, then? To see if I would maintain composure when reminded of my former position? One of several, Bergman admitted. In this company, respect is earned, not given. Even I had to prove myself worthy of my inheritance. Alexandra considered this revelation the first personal detail Bergman had ever shared with her. And did I pass your tests tonight? Some, he replied cryptically. The most important ones are still to come. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Alexandra realized that her victory in the marketing presentation had been merely the opening move in a much longer game. Bergman was evaluating her not just as an employee but as a potential confidant, someone who could navigate both his world and the American business landscape. The question was, what would be the price of earning his complete trust? 3 months into her role at Bergman Industries, Alexandra had established a reputation for diplomatic precision. American employees sought her advice before presenting to Bergman, while German executives consulted her on American business customs. She existed in the space between worlds, trusted by both sides but fully belonging to neither. The upcoming Stuttgart conference would be her first trip to Germany representing Bergman Industries. It was a critical opportunity. The company would unveil its new American manufacturing initiative to European stakeholders, with Alexandra responsible for ensuring the message resonated across cultural divides. The presentation needs more impact, Bergman declared during their final review session in New York. They sat in his office, surrounded by 3 large screens displaying different versions of the slide. European investors understand precision and tradition. Americans respond to innovation and disruption. We need both. Alexandra studied the materials critically. The data supports our position, but the narrative lacks cohesion. May I? She gestured toward his computer. Bergman hesitated briefly before nodding. It was a small but significant moment. Allowing someone else to modify his work directly was rare. For 30 minutes, Alexandra restructured the presentation, weaving technical specifications with market projections into a compelling story of global expansion. Bergman watched silently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his analytical mind working through every implication. Better, he finally conceded, though I'm still not convinced about emphasizing the American workforce so prominently. European investors need to understand that this isn't outsourcing, it's strategic integration, Alexandra explained. We're showcasing German engineering excellence implemented through American manufacturing innovation. It's a partnership, not a conquest. Bergman's mouth twitched, the closest he typically came to smiling. An interesting choice of words. History suggests Germans have occasionally confused the two concepts. It was the first hint of self-deprecating humor she'd witnessed from it. Alexandra seized the opportunity to push further. The presentation should reflect the man you are, not just the company you've built. And what man is that, Miss Keller? Bergman asked, his tone suddenly guarded. Alexandra met his gaze directly. Someone who values excellence regardless of its origin. Who can admit when others bring value to his vision? A tense silence followed. Bergman studied her with an intensity that would have intimidated her 3 months ago. We leave for Stuttgart tomorrow, he said finally, neither confirming nor denying her assessment. The company jet departs at 8 a.m. Weber will send you the details. As Alexandra gathered her materials to leave, Bergman added, you'll be seated with me during the flight. We have matters to discuss. The Bergman Industries private jet was a study in understated luxury, all soft leather and polished wood, with every amenity discreetly tucked away until needed. Alexandra arrived at the private terminal to find Weber already there, reviewing documents on his tablet.
Morning.
He greeted her. Klaus is running late. A situation at the Berlin office required his attention. Alexandra nodded, taking a seat in the waiting area. How serious? Serious enough for a 5 a.m. video conference. Not serious enough to cancel the trip, Weber replied cryptically. He glanced up from his tablet. He was impressed with your revisions to the presentation. He didn't say so. Weber smiled slightly. He approved them without changes. For Klaus, that's practically a standing ovation. 20 minutes later, Bergman strode into the terminal, phone pressed to his ear. He acknowledged them with a curt nod before concluding his call in rapid German that was too quiet for Alexandra to hear. Berlin is handled, he announced, pocketing his phone. Let's not waste any more time. Once airborne, Bergman surprised Alexandra by taking the seat opposite her rather than retreating to the private office area at the rear of the plane. Weber seated himself several rows away, a deliberate choice that left Alexandra alone with Bergman. Stuttgart will be watching us closely, Bergman began without preamble. The board remains skeptical about our American expansion. They see it as a distraction from our core European market. Yet you're proceeding anyway, Alexandra observed. Because they're wrong, Bergman stated matter of fact. Europe is stagnating. America offers growth potential that could double our market capitalization within 5 years. Alexandra noted his choice of pronouns. Our market capitalization, not my company's. Bergman raised an eyebrow. You're quite invested in pronoun analysis, Ms. Keller. Words reveal mindset, she replied. When you arrived in America, you spoke of these Americans and your incompetence. Now you say our expansion and we need both. Small changes, significant shift. For a moment, Bergman looked almost uncomfortable, as if she had pointed out something he hadn't consciously recognized. Perhaps my cultural liaison is having some effect after all. The flight attendant appeared with coffee, momentarily interrupting their conversation. When she departed, Bergman's tone shifted to something more personal. You never asked why I hired you after our initial encounter. Alexandra set down her coffee cup carefully. I assumed Otto convinced you it was good business to have someone who understood both cultures. Otto suggested it, Bergman acknowledged, but I agreed because you did something rare. You stood your ground without seeking conflict. You commanded respect rather than demanding it. It was the most direct compliment he had ever paid her, delivered with a clinical detachment that somehow made it more meaningful. My grandfather taught me that, Alexandra said, allowing a personal note into the conversation. He believed dignity wasn't something others could take from you, only something you could surrender. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He was. He escaped East Germany in 1961, 2 months before the wall went up, left everything behind except his principles. Bergman nodded slowly. My own grandfather refused to leave Berlin during the Soviet siege. A Bergman doesn't abandon what he's built, he told my father. He saved the company by dismantling half the machinery and reassembling it in the West before the Soviets could claim it. Alexandra realized this was the first time Bergman had shared anything personal about his family history. It felt significant, a small crack in the armor he typically wore. Perhaps that's why you understand America better than your board does, she suggested. You both come from resilient traditions that value rebuilding and reinvention. An interesting theory, Bergman said, neither accepting nor rejecting her analysis. Which brings me to the matter I wanted to discuss with you. He retrieved a tablet from his briefcase and pulled up a document. This is the 5-year strategic plan for our American division. I want you to review it before we land and tell me what's wrong with it. Alexandra took the tablet, surprised by the assignment. This looks comprehensive. May I ask who prepared it? I did, Bergman replied. With input from the executive team, the document represented hundreds of hours of work market analyses, financial projections, operational timelines. Alexandra realized the enormity of what he was asking. He wanted her to critique his personal vision. I'll need some time, she said carefully. You have 7 hours, Bergman replied, standing. I'll be in the rear office if you have questions. Left alone with the strategic plan, Alexandra dove into the details. The document was brilliantly conceived from a technical and financial perspective. Bergman's genius for systems and structures was evident in every section. Yet as she moved deeper into the plan, she began noting subtle flaws in its cultural assumptions. The proposed American executive structure mimicked the German hierarchy too closely. The marketing strategy underestimated the importance of brand storytelling in the American context. The manufacturing implementation timeline failed to account for American regulatory complexities and labor relations. Small issues individually, but collectively they revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how American business culture operated beneath the surface. Bergman had created a technically perfect German plan for America, not an American plan with German precision. By the time they began their descent into Stuttgart, Alexandra had filled 20 pages of notes. She found Bergman reviewing his presentation in the rear office. I've completed my review, she said, handing him her tablet. And it's an excellent plan that will fail spectacularly. Bergman's eyes narrowed. Explain. For the remainder of the descent, Alexandra outlined her analysis, pointing out where German efficiency would clash with American business culture, where communication styles would create unnecessary friction, and where the plan's rigidity would prevent adaptation to market realities. Bergman listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, the plane was taxiing to the terminal. You've identified issues that have been troubling me without a clear cause, he finally said. It seems I've been trying to transplant a German heart into an American body. Not entirely, Alexandra countered. The engineering principles are sound. The manufacturing innovations are genuinely revolutionary, but the human elements need recalibration. Bergman nodded slowly. Can it be fixed? Yes. Yes, Alexandra said confidently, but it will require something difficult. What's that? Admitting to your board that the American expansion needs to be more American than they're comfortable with. That success will require adaptation, not just implementation. Bergman was silent as they gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark. As they reached the door, he turned to her. You'll attend all board meetings while we're here, he said, his decision apparently made. And I want you to prepare a revised strategic plan incorporating your recommendations. We'll present it on the final day. Alexandra felt the weight of this responsibility settle on her shoulders. The board won't be receptive to an American telling them how to run their business. No, Bergman agreed, a hint of something almost like mischief crossing his face. But they might listen to their CEO when he acknowledges he needs help getting America right. As they descended the stairs to the waiting cars, Weber fell into step beside them. How was the flight? He asked quietly. Enlightening, Bergman replied. It seems our cultural liaison has graduated to a strategic advisor. He turned to Alexandra. The real test begins now, Miss Keller. Stuttgart is not New York. Looking at the formidable Bergman headquarters looming in the distance, Alexandra understood the challenge ahead. In New York, she had been navigating Bergman's world on American soil. Here in Germany, she would be the outsider, challenging entrenched perspectives in their native environment. The dynamic had shifted. Bergman was now her ally, not her adversary. But as she was beginning to learn, having Klaus Bergman as an ally could be just as dangerous as having him as an enemy. His support came with expectations that few could meet. The question was, could she? The Bergman Industries headquarters in Stuttgart was an architectural marvel, a gleaming testament to German engineering excellence. 6 connected glass towers rose from a central hub, each representing one of the company's major divisions. The structure embodied everything Bergman stood for: precision, interconnectedness, and forward-thinking design. Alexandra followed Bergman and Weber through a series of security checkpoints, acutely aware of the curious glances from employees. Word had clearly spread about the American woman who had somehow earned a place at Klaus Bergman's side. The board convenes in 1 hour, Bergman informed her as they entered his executive suite. Review these. He handed her a folder containing profiles of each board member, complete with professional histories and personal annotations. Alexandra raised an eyebrow at the level of detail. This is quite thorough. Know your audience, Bergman replied matter-of-factly, especially when they're predisposed to skepticism. She scanned the documents quickly, noting patterns. 8 of the 12 board members were over 60. 10 were male. All but 1 had been educated exclusively in Germany. Only 2 had significant experience in American markets. They're going to see me as an outsider, Alexandra observed. Yes, Bergman agreed. And they'll be watching to see if I'm becoming too Americanized by allowing you this level of input. Alexandra looked up from the profiles. Are you concerned about that perception? Something flickered across Bergman's face, a brief hesitation. I'm concerned with results, not perception. The company needs this expansion to succeed. It wasn't quite an answer, but it revealed more than he probably intended. Bergman was navigating his own cultural tightrope, balancing German tradition with American opportunity, maintaining his authority while acknowledging the need for adaptation. I'll prepare for maximum resistance, Alexandra said. Bergman nodded. Good, because that's exactly what you'll face. The boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the central tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Stuttgart. A massive table of polished black stone dominated the space, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Every detail conveyed permanence and power. Alexandra entered the room alongside Bergman, conscious of the immediate shift in energy. Conversations paused. Eyes assessed. The message was clear. Justify your presence. Gentlemen, Bergman began in German. You're familiar with Alexandra Keller from our reports. She will be joining us for all sessions during the conference. Heinrich Wahler, the board chairman whom Alexandra had met at Bergman's dinner, leaned forward slightly. How unusual. Is there a specific reason for Ms. Keller's attendance? The question was directed at Bergman, but Wahler's eyes remained fixed on Alexandra, evaluating her reaction. Ms. Keller has identified critical weaknesses in our American strategy, Bergman replied evenly. Her insights will be valuable to our discussions. A ripple of subtle displeasure moved through the room. Alexandra maintained a neutral expression, recognizing the cultural subtext. In this environment, weaknesses were addressed privately, not announced to leadership. Bergman had deliberately created tension to establish the importance of her role. Perhaps Ms. Keller would like to share these insights. Before we begin our formal agenda, Wahler suggested, his tone making it clear this was a challenge, not an invitation. Bergman glanced at Alexandra, a silent question in his eyes. Are you ready? She gave a slight nod and addressed the board in German. Thank you for allowing me to participate, gentlemen. To be clear, the American expansion strategy is technically sound. The engineering is impeccable, the financial modeling robust. She paused, noting a few relaxed postures around the table. They'd expected criticism of their core competencies. However, she continued, the strategy overlooks fundamental aspects of American business culture that will significantly impact implementation and market reception. I've prepared a brief analysis for your consideration. Alexandra distributed the document she'd worked on during the flight. It was concise, data-driven, and framed as optimization opportunities rather than criticisms, a deliberate choice to respect German business communication preferences. The board members reviewed the document in silence. Alexandra waited, maintaining perfect posture despite her fatigue from the overnight flight. Finally, Dieter Kruger, the eldest board member and former head of engineering, looked up. You suggest our organizational structure is too hierarchical for American operations. Hierarchy ensures quality control and accountability. In Germany, yes, Alexandra acknowledged. In America, excessive hierarchy creates bottlenecks that slow innovation and market responsiveness. American employees expect greater autonomy within established parameters, so we should abandon our proven methods to accommodate American individualism, Kruger asked skeptically. Not abandon, Alexandra corrected. Adapt. The core principles remain precision, reliability, innovation. The implementation methodology changes to maximize effectiveness in the American context for the next 40 minutes. Alexandra fielded increasingly specific questions from the board. She responded with precise data, concrete examples, and practical solutions. Throughout the exchange, Bergman remained silent, observing the dynamic with keen attention. When Voller finally called for a break, Alexandra had earned, if not approval, at least serious consideration from most board members. As they filed out, Bergman approached her. You handled that well, he said quietly. Particularly Kruger. He rarely engages directly with presentations. He reminds me of my grandfather, Alexandra replied. Traditional values, deep expertise, healthy skepticism of change. Bergman raised an eyebrow. And how did you manage your grandfather's skepticism? By honoring his experience while gently expanding his perspective, Alexandra said with a small smile. Never challenging what he knew to be true, only adding to. A diplomatic approach, a respectful one, she corrected. Bergman studied her for a moment. You've earned yourself a voice in the room. Using it effectively will be your next challenge. The afternoon sessions focused on technical aspects of the manufacturing expansion equipment specifications, quality control protocols, supply chain integration. Alexandra listened attentively, making notes but rarely commenting. This was Bergman's domain of expertise, and she recognized the importance of knowing when to contribute and when to learn. It was during the evening's formal dinner when she faced her next test. Seated between Weber and Kruger, Alexandra navigated careful conversation as the meal progressed through its 7 meticulous courses. Miss Keller, Kruger said as dessert was served, you've made quite an impression for someone so young. Klaus rarely invites outsiders into our inner circle. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute, Alexandra replied diplomatically. Kruger nodded thoughtfully. My granddaughter's about your age. She recently completed her engineering doctorate at Munich. Very traditional path, very predictable. He took a sip of wine. Your path seems ... less conventional. It wasn't quite a criticism, but the implication was clear. Her background didn't match their expectations. Innovation often emerges from unconventional paths. Herr Kruger, Alexandra replied. Bergman Industries wasn't built by following others' blueprints. The older man's eyes crinkled slightly. A fair point, though Klaus inherited a successful company. His father laid strong foundations. True, Alexandra acknowledged, but he transformed it from regional success to global leadership. That required vision beyond tradition. You seem to know our CEO quite well, Kruger observed, watching her carefully. Alexandra recognized the subtle probe. Rumors about her relationship with Bergman were inevitable in any corporate environment. In the conservative German context, they would be particularly problematic. I know his business philosophy, she clarified, his commitment to excellence, precision, and strategic growth. Beyond that, Herr Bergman remains as private with colleagues as he is with the board. Kruger seemed satisfied with her answer. You speak our language fluently, understand our business culture, yet advocate for American approaches. Where do your loyalties lie, Miss Keller? It was the question beneath all others, the fundamental concern driving their skepticism. My loyalty is to excellence, Herr Kruger, Alexandra replied without hesitation, to creating a truly global company that draws strength from both cultures rather than forcing one to become the other. A diplomatic answer, he said, echoing Bergman's earlier comment. An honest one, she countered, again with the same correction she'd given Bergman. Kruger studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. We shall see. From across the table, Alexandra noticed Bergman watching their exchange with interest. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw a hint of approval in his gaze before he returned his attention to Voller. Later that evening, as the dinner concluded, Alexandra found herself alone on the terrace overlooking Stuttgart's glittering skyline. The day's mental exertion had left her drained but satisfied. She had established herself as more than Bergman's American assistant. She had become a voice the board couldn't simply dismiss. Quite a view, isn't it? Weber's voice came from behind her. He joined her at the railing, offering a glass of schnapps, a traditional end to a German business dinner. Alexandra accepted the glass. Thank you. You've navigated your first day admirably, Weber said. The board is intrigued, if not yet convinced. And Bergman? She asked. Is he satisfied with my performance? Weber smiled slightly. Klaus is never satisfied. It's his defining characteristic, but he's pleased with his decision to bring you. Alexandra sipped the schnapps, feeling its warmth spread through her. He's taking a significant risk backing my recommendations against the board's instincts. Yes, Weber agreed. More than you realize. Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. What do you mean? Weber hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Klaus isn't just the CEO. He's the embodiment of Bergman Industries to the German business. Any perceived Americanization of his approach threatens more than the company's traditions. It threatens his personal standing. Then why risk it? Because Klaus sees what the others don't yet. That global leadership requires global thinking, Weber replied, and perhaps because he respects your willingness to challenge him. Few people do, especially here in Stuttgart. Alexandra considered this as she gazed out at the city. Tomorrow I present the revised strategic plan. Will the board actually consider it? They'll listen, Weber said. Whether they embrace it depends on how well you bridge their world and yours. He finished his schnapps. Get some rest, Alexandra. Tomorrow determines whether you've truly earned a seat at this table. As Weber left, Alexandra remained on the terrace contemplating the challenge ahead. In less than 6 months, she had journeyed from serving meals to shaping multinational strategy. The waitress who had once been dismissed with a casual German insult was now helping design Bergman's American future. But as the cool night air brushed her face, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. She hadn't just earned Bergman's respect, she had become essential to his vision. And that created a vulnerability neither of them had anticipated. Dawn broke over Stuttgart, painting the city in soft golden light as Alexandra prepared for the day ahead. Sleep had been elusive, her mind occupied with refining her presentation for the board. She had spent hours crafting a strategic plan that honored Bergman Industries' German heritage while embracing American innovation, a delicate balance that could easily tip into resistance if presented incorrectly. A discreet knock at her hotel room door revealed a courier with a package from Bergman. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Review these materials before the 9 a.m. session. They contain information not yet shared with the board. Use it wisely. KB Alexandra plugged the drive into her laptop and discovered financial projections for Bergman's American competitors, along with internal market analyses that hadn't been included in the original strategic plan. The data revealed a troubling pattern. Bergman Industries was losing ground in key innovation metrics to smaller, more agile American firms. The message was clear. Bergman wasn't just expanding into America for growth opportunities, he was doing it to address a competitive vulnerability. This revelation placed her presentation in a new light. She wasn't just advocating for cultural adaptation, she was helping position the company for survival in a rapidly evolving market. When Alexandra arrived at Bergman headquarters, she found the CEO waiting for her in the lobby. Did you review the materials? He asked without preamble as they walked toward the elevator. Yes, the competitive landscape is more challenging than the board realizes, Bergman nodded. The traditional German approach, incremental improvement. Perfect execution, is losing effectiveness against American innovation speed. The board sees America as merely a new market. I see it as a necessary evolution. Does the board know about the innovation gap? Alexandra asked. They've seen sanitized versions of the data, Bergman replied. Today they get the unvarnished truth, delivered by someone who understands both the problem and the solution. As they entered the elevator, Alexandra realized what Bergman was doing. By having her present this sensitive information, he was cementing her credibility with the board while creating distance between himself and potentially unpopular conclusions. It was strategically brilliant and placed enormous pressure on her performance. You're using me as a lightning rod, she observed. Bergman's expression remained neutral. I'm giving you an opportunity to prove your value at the highest level. The board respects expertise even when it challenges their assumptions, and if they reject my analysis, then we both learn something important about the limits of persuasion, he replied cryptically as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. The boardroom was already filled when they arrived. Conversation ceased as Alexandra moved to the presenter's position, Bergman taking his seat at the head of the table. Gentlemen, Bergman began, yesterday MZ Keller provided an overview of cultural considerations for our American expansion. Today she will present a comprehensive strategic plan incorporating those insights, along with new competitive intelligence. I expect your full attention. With that terse introduction, he nodded to Alexandra, yielding the floor completely, a show of confidence that was not lost on the board members. Thank you, Herr Bergman, Alexandra began, activating the presentation display. What I'm about to share reflects both opportunity and urgency for Bergman Industries' global position. For the next 40 minutes, Alexandra methodically built her case. Moving from market analysis to competitive positioning to implementation strategy, she presented in crisp, technical German, using the language's precision to convey complex data while honoring the board's communication preferences. When she reached the section on the innovation gap, she noted several board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The data was irrefutable. American competitors were bringing new technologies to market 30% faster than Bergman Industries, despite having inferior engineering. This gap represents both threat and opportunity. The threat is obvious: continued market share erosion in high-growth segments. The opportunity is transformation, combining German engineering excellence with American innovation speed to create an unbeatable competitive advantage. She outlined a dual approach, maintaining the traditional German organizational structure for established product lines while creating a more flexible American structure for emerging technologies. employees. This hybrid model preserved what worked while enabling necessary evolution. We don't need to become American, Alexandra emphasized. We need to adopt specific American practices that address our vulnerabilities while preserving our strengths. As she concluded, the room was silent. Alexandra had presented a vision that was neither fully German nor American. It was distinctly Bergman, but adapted for global leadership. Questions? She prompted, meeting each board member's gaze steadily. Valor spoke first. Your analysis is thorough, Ms. Keller, but this hybrid approach creates significant operational complexity. The efficiency loss could outweigh the innovation gains. With respect, Herr Voller, Alexandra countered, the current efficiency is optimized for a market that no longer exists. In today's environment, speed to market often outweighs marginal efficiency improvements, a very American perspective, Kruger interjected, though his tone lacked its previous skepticism. A global perspective, Alexandra corrected gently. Japanese manufacturers have already adopted similar models. Chinese competitors are following suit. This isn't about becoming American, it's about surviving in a market increasingly defined by American innovation time. For the next hour, the board subjected Alexandra's plan to rigorous examination. She defended her positions with data and logic, occasionally conceding valid critiques and incorporating them into revised recommendations. Throughout the exchange, Bergman remained silent, allowing her to stand or fall on her own merit. When the questioning finally concluded, Valor turned to Bergman. You've been uncharacteristically quiet, Klaus. What is your position on this proposed transformation? All eyes turned to the CEO, including Alexandra's. This was the moment of truth. Would he fully endorse her plan or hedge his support? Bergman leaned forward slightly. My position is that Bergman Industries must evolve to maintain its leadership. Ms. Keller has identified a path forward that preserves our core identity while addressing critical vulnerabilities. He paused, scanning the faces around the table. However, this decision belongs to the board. I've presented the problem and a potential solution. The choice is yours. It was a masterful move, asserting his recommendation while respecting the board's authority, creating space for them to reach their own conclusion rather than forcing compliance. Voller nodded slowly. We will need time to deliberate. The board will reconvene after lunch to discuss implementation considerations. As the meeting adjourned, several board members approached Alexandra with follow-up questions, a positive sign that they were taking her recommendations seriously. Bergman observed from a distance, making no attempt to influence these exchanges. When the room finally cleared, Alexandra gathered her materials, feeling the weight of the morning's performance. She had done everything possible to convince the board. Now the outcome was beyond her control. Walk with me, Bergman said, appearing beside her. It wasn't a request. They moved silently through the executive floor, passing curious employees who quickly averted their gaze. Bergman led her to a private terrace overlooking the Bergman Industries campus. You exceeded expectations, he said when they were alone. Coming from Bergman, it was high praise indeed. Thank you. Though the board hasn't decided yet, they will approve the core strategy, he stated with certainty. They may modify implementation timelines or organizational specifics, but the fundamental approach will proceed. Alexandra studied his profile as he gazed out over the company he had transformed. You knew they would. Bergman turned to face her. I suspected. The board respects data and logical argument above all else. You provided both. Without challenging their expertise or authority, you could have presented this yourself, Alexandra observed. Why have me do it? Because I needed them to hear it from someone who truly understands both worlds, Bergman replied. My perspective would have been dismissed as an impulsive American fascination. Yours carried genuine credibility. Alexandra processed this admission. So I was a strategic tool in your boardroom diplomacy. Yes, Bergman acknowledged without apology, and you performed brilliantly in that role. But you've become more than that. What do you mean? You've become indispensable to this transition, he said matter-of-factly. The board will approve the strategy on one condition, that you oversee its implementation. Alexandra felt a surge of both pride and concern. That's a significant promotion from cultural liaison indeed. You would become executive vice president of American operations, reporting directly to me. The position would require relocation between Stuttgart and New York, with substantial responsibility for the success or failure of our American initiative. The offer was beyond anything Alexandra had anticipated when she'd accepted the position months ago. It represented career advancement that typically took decades to achieve. This is what you planned from the beginning, she realized. Since that night at the restaurant, Bergman's expression revealed nothing. I recognized potential. Whether that potential could be realized remained to be seen, and if I had failed, then I would have found another approach, he replied simply. But you didn't fail. You exceeded expectations at every stage. Alexandra absorbed the magnitude of what was being offered and what it would demand from her. I would need to complete my MBA. Arrangements can be made. The position doesn't formally begin until the American facility breaks ground in 4 months. And my responsibilities? Translating German excellence into American success, Bergman stated. Building a bridge between two business cultures that typically repel rather than attract, proving that my faith in your abilities was justified. Alexandra recognized the subtext beneath his business-like demeanor. Bergman was offering her not just a position but a partnership, a chance to help shape the future of a global enterprise. The board will want to meet with you this afternoon to discuss terms, Bergman continued. Their approval is contingent on your acceptance, and if I decline, then the implementation will proceed without you, likely with less success. he answered candidly. The question is whether you're prepared to embrace the opportunity you've created. As Alexandra looked out over the Bergman campus, she thought about how far she had come from a server being dismissed with casual arrogance to a strategic leader being offered global responsibility. Her perfect reply that night hadn't just been a momentary victory. It had been the beginning of a transformation for both herself and the man who had underestimated her. "I'll need to review the details," she said finally. Bergman nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I would expect nothing less." The boardroom felt different in the afternoon light, less intimidating, more contemplative. Alexandra sat across from 5 board members, including Voller and Kruger, who had been appointed to negotiate the terms of her potential appointment. Bergman had recused himself from this discussion, a strategic move that allowed the board to feel ownership of their decision. "Miss Keller," Voller began, his tone considerably warmer than the previous day, "the board has carefully considered your strategic recommendations. We find your analysis compelling and your proposed approach prudent." Alexandra noted the careful word choice. Not innovative or exciting, terms that would clash with German business sensibilities, but prudent, a deliberate acknowledgement that her plan represented sound judgment rather than risky experimentation. "Thank you, Herr Voller," she replied. "We are prepared to implement the core strategy," he continued, "with certain modifications to governance structures and implementation timeline." He slid a document across the table. "The details are outlined here." Alexandra reviewed the proposal methodically. The board had accepted approximately 80% of her recommendations, extending some implementation timelines while accelerating others. Most significantly, they had approved the creation of a hybrid organizational structure for American operations, maintaining German precision in engineering while adopting more flexible American approaches to innovation and market development. "These modifications are reasonable," she acknowledged, recognizing the importance of giving the boardroom to assert their authority through adjustments. Kruger leaned forward slightly. "The success of this strategy will require leadership that understands both worlds. Herr Bergman has recommended you for this position." His expression revealed neither approval nor disapproval of this recommendation, simply acknowledgement. "I'm honored by his confidence," Alexandra said carefully. "The position would be Executive Vice President of American Operations," Voller explained, "reporting directly to Klaus with dotted line accountability to the board. The compensation package is outlined on page 7. Alexandra turned to the referenced page and momentarily struggled to maintain her composure. The proposed salary was nearly 10 times her current compensation, with substantial equity grants and performance bonuses. It was life-changing money enough to pay off her student, support her mother's medical expenses, and still live comfortably in both New York and Stuttgart. "The terms are generous," she said, keeping her voice steady. "They reflect the responsibility," Kruger noted. "You would be accountable for the success of a multi-billion-dollar initiative that represents the future of Bergman Industries. Failure would have significant consequences for the company and for your career." The warning was clear but fair. This wasn't a gift, it was a calculated risk on both sides. "I understand the stakes," Alexandra assured him. "There is one additional condition," Voller added. "The board requires your commitment for a minimum of 3 years. We're investing not just in a strategy, but in you as its architect. We need assurance of continuity through the critical implementation phase." 3 years. It was a substantial commitment at her age, especially for someone who had never planned to enter corporate leadership. Alexandra had originally accepted the cultural liaison position as a temporary step while completing her MBA, tending to eventually launch her own international consulting practice. "May I have until tomorrow morning to consider the offer in its entirety?" she asked. "Of course," Voller replied. "We expect a decision by 9 a.m. The board reconvenes at 10 to finalize the strategic plan approval." As Alexandra left the boardroom, she felt the weight of the decision before her. She had entered Bergman Industries through an unexpected side door, a chance encounter that had revealed her capabilities to the right person at the right moment. Now that door had opened onto a path she had never anticipated. She found Weber waiting in the reception area. "The car is ready to take you back to the hotel," he said. "Klaus suggests you take the evening to consider the offer carefully." "Where is he?" Alexandra asked, realizing she hadn't seen Bergman since their morning conversation. "Emergency video conference with our Chinese manufacturing partners," Weber explained. "He asked me to convey his confidence in your decision-making." The drive back to the hotel passed in contemplative silence. Alexandra watched Stuttgart's blend of modern architecture and historic buildings slide past her window, feeling strangely disconnected from the whirlwind of events reshaping her future. In her hotel room, she kicked off her heels and called the one person who could provide perspective untainted by corporate considerations. "Rachel? It's me, Alex. How's Germany? Are the Lederhosen-clad executives bowing to your superior intellect yet?" Her roommate's voice was a welcome connection to normality. "Something like that," Alexandra replied with a small laugh. She proceeded to explain the day's events and the decision before her. Rachel whistled low. "Executive VP? That's massive. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's all happening too fast," Alexandra admitted. 6 months ago I was serving schnitzel, now I'm being offered a corner office with global responsibilities. Part of me is thrilled, part of me is terrified, and part of me is wondering if I'm betraying my original goals, which were to finish my MBA, gain some corporate experience, and eventually start my own cross-cultural consulting firm, Alexandra recounted. Not to become part of the corporate machine I plan to advise. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Can I play devil's advocate? Please do. What if this is actually the perfect path to your original goal? Think about it. 3 years leading a massive international initiative gives you credibility no consultant could dream of. You'd be implementing the very strategies you hope to someday advise others on. It was a perspective Alexandra hadn't fully considered. So you think I should accept? I think you already know you're going to accept, Rachel replied. You're just looking for permission to admit it. The observation struck uncomfortably close to the truth. There's something else, Alexandra confessed. I'm worried about working so closely with Bergman. He's brilliant and fascinating, but also demanding and occasionally ruthless. The dynamic between us is complicated. Complicated how? Rachel's tone sharpened with concern. He hasn't crossed any lines, has he? No, nothing like that, Alexandra quickly clarified. It's entirely professional, but there's an intensity to our interactions that's both challenging and energizing. He pushes me constantly, sees capabilities in me I didn't recognize myself. Sounds like a good mentor, Rachel observed. Maybe, or maybe he's just using my talents to advance his own agenda. Of course he is, Rachel said matter-of-factly. That's how corporate relationships work. The question is whether his agenda aligns with your growth. From what you've described, it does. By the time they ended the call, Alexandra had reached a decision not just about the job offer, but about her approach to this unexpected career trajectory. She would accept the position, but on her terms, with clear boundaries and her own strategic goals. She spent the evening reviewing the contract in detail, making notes on specific terms she wanted to clarify or modify. When exhaustion finally overtook her, she slept more soundly than she had in weeks. The uncertainty resolved. The next morning, Alexandra arrived at Bergman headquarters early, determined to speak with Klaus before meeting the board. She found him in his office, reviewing documents with characteristic intensity. Good morning, she said from the doorway. Bergman looked up, his expression revealing nothing about his expectations for their conversation. Ms. Keller, come in. I've reviewed the board's offer, Alexandra began without preamble, matching his direct approach. I'm prepared to accept, with 3 modifications. If Bergman was surprised by her counterproposal, he didn't show it. Go on. First, I need flexibility to complete my MBA. The board's timeline would allow for it, but I want explicit accommodation in writing. Bergman nodded once. Reasonable. Next. Second, I want an independent budget for cultural integration initiatives. Not just training programs, but structural elements that will actually make the hybrid organization function effectively. The board will want specifics and metrics, Bergman noted. I'll provide them, Alexandra assured him. Third, and most importantly, I want clarity on decision authority. The contract says I report to you with dotted line accountability to the board, but in practice, that arrangement often creates conflict. I need explicit documentation of which decisions are mine to make independently. Bergman studied her for a long moment. These are sophisticated requests for someone with limited corporate experience. I've been researching executive contracts since yesterday afternoon, Alexandra admitted. The position deserves due diligence. Something like approval flickered in Bergman's eyes. I'll support these modifications. The board will likely approve the first 2 readily. The third may require negotiation. Thank you, Alexandra said. I have one personal question before I meet with them. Yes? Why me? There are countless executives with decades more experience who could lead this initiative. Why trust something so critical to someone 6 months out of food service? Bergman set down his pen and gave her his full attention, a rare occurrence that underscored the significance of the moment. Experience is valuable, he acknowledged, but it often comes with entrenched thinking. Traditional executives would approach this as either a German expansion or an American acquisition. You instinctively understand it as a true integration because you're not bound by corporate orthodoxy. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. That night at the restaurant, 2 response didn't just demonstrate language skills, it showed character. You corrected me without seeking conflict or surrendering dignity. That balance is precisely what Bergman Industries needs to navigate this trend. It was perhaps the most personal explanation Bergman had ever offered her, revealing that beneath his calculating exterior lay genuine appreciation for her approach. I'll accept the position, Alexandra confirmed, and I'll make this expansion succeed. Bergman nodded once. The matter settled. The board convenes in 30 minutes. I suggest you present your modifications directly. They respect forthrightness. As Alexandra turned to leave, Bergman added, one more thing, Ms. Keller. She paused in the doorway. Yes, when you become EVP of American Operations, I expect you to call me Klaus. Herr Bergman becomes unnecessarily formal between executives. It was a small gesture, but significant, an acknowledgement that their relationship was evolving from superior subordinate to something closer to peers, if not quite equals. Thank you, Klaus, Alexandra replied, testing the unfamiliar informality. I look forward to our partnership. The word partnership hung in the air between them, a subtle assertion that she viewed this new role not as a subordinate position, but as a collaborative leadership opportunity. Bergman gave a slight nod, neither confirming nor rejecting this framing. As Alexandra headed toward her meeting with the board, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. A chanced encounter, an insult, a perfect reply, and now a future she could never have imagined. The coming years would test her capabilities to their limits, but she was ready for the challenge. The waitress who had once been dismissed with casual arrogance was gone. In her place stood an executive prepared to help transform a global enterprise and, perhaps its formidable CEO in the process. 6 months into her role as Executive Vice President of American Operations, Alexandra stood at the podium on a windy Pennsylvania morning, addressing the crowd gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony of Bergman Industries' first American manufacturing facility. Behind her, Klaus Bergman and select board members watched attentively as she shifted seamlessly between English and German, ensuring her message resonated with both American workers and German executives. "Today we break ground not just for a factory, but for a new approach to global manufacturing," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd of local officials, future employees, and media representatives. One that combines German precision engineering with American innovation speed, bringing together the best of both worlds to create something truly extraordinary. The crowd applauded as Alexandra, Bergman, and local officials donned hard hats and ceremonially turned the first shovels of earth. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for business publications around the world. The image of Alexandra, who had completed her MBA just 2 weeks earlier, standing shoulder to shoulder with one of Europe's most powerful industrialists, would grace the cover of next month's Forbes. Later, as the reception wound down, Bergman approached her with 2 flutes of champagne. "Impressive speech," he said, handing her one of the glasses. "You struck exactly the right tone." "Thank you," Alexandra replied, accepting the champagne, though I noticed Voller wincing at my innovation speed reference. Bergman's mouth twitched in what had become his version of a smile, a subtle expression that few people ever witnessed. "Heinrich remains concerned about American influence diluting our engineering standards. Your results will convince him more effectively than words." They stood in companionable silence, watching the mingling crowds. Their working relationship had evolved considerably over the past months. The formal Miss Keller and Herr Bergman had indeed given way to Alexandra and Klaus, and their interactions had developed a rhythm of mutual respect and occasional, carefully measured personal disclosure. "The American team is coming together well," Alexandra observed. "The hybrid organizational structure is working better than expected. German engineering precision with American implementation flexibility." "And how are you adapting to the constant travel?" Klaus asked, his tone almost casual, a rarity from a man who seldom engaged in personal inquiry. Alexandra considered the question. Her life had transformed, completely splitting time between a company apartment in Stuttgart and a newly purchased condo in New York, flying between continents twice monthly, navigating 2 distinct business cultures while trying to forge them into a cohesive whole. "I've learned to sleep on planes," she replied lightly, "and to appreciate the differences between German and American coffee." Klaus raised an eyebrow, a diplomatic non-answer. Alexandra smiled. "The truth? It's exhausting but exhilarating. I've never been so challenged or so fulfilled professionally." "And personally?" The question was unexpected, a step beyond their usual boundaries. Alexandra glanced at him, surprised by his interest. "Personally, it's been ... an adjustment. Friends wonder why I'm never available. Family worries I'm working too hard. Dating is essentially impossible." She hadn't meant to reveal quite so, but the whirlwind of the past months had left little time for personal reflection, let alone conversation about it. Klaus nodded thoughtfully. "Leadership at this level demands sacrifices. Few understand its isolating nature." It was perhaps the most personal observation he had ever offered, a rare acknowledgement of the human cost behind his extraordinary success. Alexandra recognized the significance of his candor. "Is that why you've never married?" she asked, taking a risk by extending the personal conversation. If Klaus was startled by her directness, he didn't show it. "Partially," he admitted. "A conventional personal life requires compromises I've been unwilling to make. The company has always come first. And has that been worth it?" He considered her question with typical thoroughness. "For me, yes, the company is my legacy. But it's not a choice I would recommend universally." A server approached with fresh champagne, momentarily interrupting their conversation. When they were alone again, Klaus shifted the focus back to business. "The board is pleased with your progress, particularly the cultural integration initiatives. Your insistence on an independent budget for those programs has proven prescient." It was high praise from a man who rarely acknowledged others' foresight. Alexandra had implemented a series of structural changes, from cross-continental team rotations to modified meeting protocols, that blended German thoroughness with American efficiency. The results were promising. Reduced friction, faster decision-making, and improved collaboration between German and American teams. "The real test comes with production launch in 6 months, Alexandra noted. "Theory becomes practice when the assembly lines start running." "Indeed. Which brings me to the purpose of our conversation," Klaus said, his tone shifting subtly to indicate a transition to more substantive matters. "The New York executive team requires restructuring. Davidson's retirement creates an opportunity to realign leadership with our hybrid approach." Alexandra had been anticipating this discussion. Thomas Davidson, the aging head head of North American sales, had announced his retirement the previous month, creating a key vacancy in the American leadership team. "I've reviewed the internal candidates," she replied. "Williams from regional operations and Chun from marketing both have potential, but neither fully understands the German engineering perspective." "I agree," Klaus said, "which is why I'm proposing Dieter Müller from our Stuttgart team." Alexandra carefully concealed her surprise. Müller was a brilliant engineer with impeccable credentials, but his interpersonal skills were notoriously underdeveloped, particularly with American colleagues. "Mueller's technically excellent," she acknowledged diplomatically, "but his communication style would create significant friction with the American sales organization. Precisely why he needs 6 months of cultural integration training before Davidson leaves," Klaus countered. "Under your direct guidance." Alexandra recognized the strategic maneuver. Klaus wasn't just proposing a personnel change. He was testing her ability to transform a traditional German executive into an effective cross-cultural leader, a visible demonstration of her integration philosophy. "It's an interesting challenge," she admitted, "but if Mueller isn't receptive to adaptation, it could undermine everything we've built." "Then make him receptive," Klaus replied simply, as if commanding the tide to change direction. "You transform the board's perspective. Surely one stubborn engineer can't be more difficult." Alexandra considered the implications carefully. Success would significantly advance the integration process, creating a powerful example for others to follow. Failure would validate the skeptics who believed German and American business cultures were fundamentally incompatible. "I'll need your full support," she said finally, "including permission to modify Mueller's responsibilities if he proves genuinely unable to adapt." Klaus studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Agreed, but I expect success, Alexandra. Mueller represents a significant constituency within the company, traditional engineers who fear American influence will dilute our standards. Transforming him transforms dozens more by example." The weight of the assignment settled on her shoulder. This wasn't just about filling a vacancy. It was about winning hearts and minds across the organization. "I'll start immediately," she promised, "though it means postponing my return to New York next week." "Your apartment in Stuttgart remains available," Klaus noted, "and I believe you'll find Mueller worth the investment of your time." As the reception concluded and guests began departing, Alexandra found herself reflecting on how completely her life had changed in less than a year, from serving meals in a New York diner to redesigning the executive structure of a global corporation, all because she had refused to accept disrespect from an arrogant billionaire who now valued her judgment on matters he would once have considered beyond question. The irony wasn't lost on her. Klaus Bergman, who had dismissed her as merely decorative incompetence, now trusted her to reshape his company's future. Their relationship had evolved from adversarial to collaborative, with occasional glimpses of genuine personal connection beneath the professional partnership. Yet as she watched him across the room engaged in conversation with local officials, Alexandra recognized that Klaus remained in many ways as enigmatic as ever. Brilliant, demanding, occasionally surprisingly vulnerable, but ultimately driven by a vision that consumed him completely. The coming months would test not just Mueller's adaptability, but the foundation of trust she and Klaus had carefully constructed. Leadership at this level involved complex interpersonal dynamics that transcended traditional professional boundaries. Their partnership functioned effectively because they maintained a careful balance, close enough for genuine collaboration, distant enough for objective assessment. That evening, as Alexandra reviewed Mueller's personnel file in her Stuttgart apartment, her phone chimed with a text from Klaus, a rare occurrence outside business hours. "Mueller arrives tomorrow, 9 a.m. He's been told this assignment is crucial to his future. Use that leverage as needed." Alexandra smiled slightly at the characteristic directness. No pleasantries, no unnecessary words, pure strategic guidance. She typed a simple acknowledgement, then returned to her preparation for the challenge ahead. The groundbreaking ceremony had been symbolic in more ways than one. They were indeed breaking new ground, not just for a factory, but for a fundamentally new approach to global business leadership. Alexandra was no longer simply building a bridge between cultures. She was helping forge an entirely new organizational identity that transcended national boundaries. As she closed Mueller's file and prepared for bed, Alexandra reflected on Klaus's rare moment of personal disclosure. Leadership at this level demands sacrifices. Few understand its isolating nature. It was perhaps the first time he had acknowledged the human cost behind his extraordinary success, and a reminder that the path she now walked carried similar personal implications. The question that lingered as she drifted towards sleep was whether those sacrifices would ultimately prove worthwhile. Not just for the company, but for herself. Dieter Müller was exactly as his file had described him: brilliant, methodical, and utterly inflexible. His first meeting with Alexandra established the challenge she faced. Müller sat across from her in the Stuttgart office, his posture rigid, his expression skeptical. "Frau Keller," he began in German, deliberately avoiding her executive title, "I understand you wish to prepare me for American operations. I assure you, I am already prepared. I've been with Bergman Industries for 17 years. I know our standards and expectations." Alexander maintained a neutral expression despite the subtle condescension. "Your technical qualifications are impeccable, Herr Müller. That's why Klaus selected you for this position. My role is to help you translate that expertise into effective leadership within the American context." Muller's jaw tightened slightly. "I was not aware that engineering excellence required translation." "Excellence doesn't," Alexandra acknowledged. knowledge. Communication does. Leadership does. You'll be overseeing American sales teams who respond to different motivational approaches than German engineering teams. Sales is sales, Mueller stated flatly. Numbers, targets, results. These are universal. Alexandra recognized the fundamental misconception immediately. Mueller viewed his role as purely technical, ensuring the American sales force understood the engineering specifications correctly. He hadn't grasped that cultural integration went far beyond linguistic translation of technical documents. Let me ask you a question here, Mueller. How would you handle an American sales director who challenges your timeline projections in a team meeting? Mueller frowned slightly. I would explain that the timelines are calculated based on engineering reality, not sales preferences. And if they persisted, suggesting alternative approaches, I would remind them of the organizational hierarchy and the importance of German engineering standards. Mueller replied, his tone indicating he considered the matter settled. Alexandra nodded thoughtfully. That approach would create immediate resistance in an American context, not because the standards are wrong, but because the communication style conflicts with cultural expectations. For the next hour, Alexandra methodically outlined the differences between German and American professional communication, focusing particularly on hierarchy, directness, and problem-solving approaches. Mueller listened with increasing discomfort, occasionally interjecting objections that revealed his deep attachment to traditional German business practices. This sounds like unnecessary coddling, he said finally. If American professionals cannot adapt to our standards, perhaps they should not be working for a German company. Adaptation goes both ways. Herr Mueller, Alexandra replied evenly. Bergman Industries isn't imposing German culture on America. We're creating a hybrid approach that preserves the best of both traditions. That's why we're succeeding where other European manufacturers have failed. Mueller's skepticism remained evident, but Alexandra detected a flicker of intellectual curiosity beneath his resistance. He was, after all, an engineer trained to solve complex problems with optimal solutions. She needed to frame cultural adaptation as a technical challenge rather than a philosophical shift. I propose a practical approach, he suggested. Over the next 6 weeks, we'll identify specific scenarios you'll face in your new role. We'll develop and practice communication strategies for each, measuring their effectiveness against defined metric. The technical framing had its intended effect. Mueller's posture relaxed slightly. A systematic methodology. That is acceptable. It was a modest beginning, but Alexander recognized it as progress. Mueller wouldn't be transformed overnight, but he could learn to adapt his approach while maintaining his core identity as a German engineering executive. That evening, she met with Klaus in his office to discuss the initial assessment. Mueller is exactly as expected, she reported. Technically brilliant, culturally rigid, but not entirely unreceptive. I've developed a 6-week integration program focusing on practical scenarios rather than abstract cultural concepts. Klaus nodded, studying the outline she provided. An engineering approach to cultural adaptation. Clever. He needs to see results to believe in the process, Alexandra explained. By week 3, I want to include video conferences with key American team members, controlled interactions where he can practice the approaches we've developed. Approved, Klaus said. Though I'm curious why you've scheduled a full week in New York midway through the program. Because Mueller needs to experience American business culture firsthand, not just learn about it theoretically, Alexandra explained. He's never spent significant time in the United States. Everything he knows comes from brief business trips and engineering conferences. Klaus considered this an immersion approach, risky but potentially more effective than continued Stuttgart-based training. Exactly. Mueller respects data and direct experience. Theory alone won't convince him. As they finished discussing the integration program, Klaus shifted to broader strategic matters. The Pennsylvania facility construction is progressing ahead of schedule. The American team has implemented several efficiency improvements to the original plans. I saw the updated timeline, Alexandra confirmed. The modified workflow design they proposed could reduce final assembly time by nearly 15% without compromising quality standards, Klaus added, a note of surprised approval in his voice. Your hybrid teams are producing results even the skeptics can't dismiss. It was a significant acknowledgement, especially from a man who rarely offered praise. For months, Alexandra had been carefully integrating German and American approaches throughout the organization, creating teams that leveraged the strengths of both cultures. The Pennsylvania facility represented the most visible test of this methodology. We should consider implementing similar workflow modifications in Stuttgart, Alexandra suggested. The American innovations could address some of the bottlenecks in our European production line. Klaus raised an eyebrow. Proposing American methods for our German facilities? That would have been unthinkable a year ago. Good ideas shouldn't be limited by geography, Alexandra replied simply. Something shifted in Klaus's expression. A subtle softening that few people would have noticed. You've changed us, Alexandra. More than I anticipated when I created your position. The personal observation caught her by surprise. I've simply helped identify where each approach adds most value. You've done considerably more than that, Klaus countered. You've challenged fundamental assumptions about how this company operates, including my own. It was perhaps the most direct acknowledgement he had ever made of her influence on his thinking. Alexandra felt a momentary uncertainty about how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. The changes were necessary for global growth, she said finally. You recognize that before anyone else? skills. Klaus nodded slightly, accepting her diplomatic framing of his evolution. The board meets next week to review the American initiative's progress. They've requested your personal assessment of Mueller's development potential. He'll be ready, Alexandra assured him. Not perfect, but significantly improved. Enough to demonstrate that even the most traditional executives can adapt to success. The following weeks proved challenging, but ultimately productive. Mueller approached cultural adaptation with the same methodical precision he applied to engineering problems. Analyzing, testing, measuring results. His transformation wasn't dramatic, but it was substantive. He learned to modulate his communication style, recognize cultural cues, and adapt his leadership approach to American expectations without compromising his engineering standards. The New York Immersion Week proved particularly effective. Removed from his comfortable Stuttgart environment, Mueller experienced American business culture directly from the faster pace of meetings to the more fluid hierarchical structures. Alexandra arranged for him to shadow key American executives, observing their interaction styles and decision-making approaches. By the end of the 6-week program, Mueller had developed a functional cross-cultural leadership style. It wasn't seamless. His German directness still occasionally created friction, but he had acquired tools to recognize and address cultural misalignments before they escalated into conflicts. The board presentation became a watershed moment for Alexandra's integration initiative. With Mueller beside her, she presented concrete metrics demonstrating the success of the cultural adaptation program. Mueller himself explained how his modified approach had improved collaboration with American teams while maintaining Bergman's engineering standards. "We are not becoming American," he stated firmly in his slightly stilted but clear English. "We are becoming more effective globally while remaining essentially German in our engineering excellence." It was exactly the message the board needed to hear. Cultural adaptation framed as strategic advantage rather than identity dilution. Even Voller, the most traditionalist board member, appeared cautiously approving. After the presentation, Klaus pulled Alexandra aside. "Impressive work with Mueller. You've proven the concept can scale beyond individual contributors to executive leadership." "Thank you," Alexandra replied. "Though the real test comes when he takes full responsibility in New York next month. I'm confident he'll succeed," Klaus said. "Which raises an important question about your next challenge." Alexandra looked at him curiously. "The Pennsylvania facility launch is my current priority. Beyond that," Klaus clarified, "your success with the American initiative suggests potential for broader application. The board is considering a global reorganization based on your hybrid model." Alexandra absorbed this revelation with careful neutralness. That would be a significant structural change. Indeed, one that would require leadership from someone intimately familiar with the methodology. Klaus continued, watching her reaction. Someone who could implement it across all Bergman operations worldwide. The implication was clear but startling. Klaus was suggesting a potential promotion to a global executive role, perhaps even a C-suite position. It was an extraordinary opportunity that would elevate her far beyond her current responsibilities. That's an intriguing possibility, Alexandra said carefully, though it would require careful planning and board consensus. Klaus nodded. "Consider it a longer-term discussion. For now, focus on completing Mueller's transition and launching the Pennsylvania facility. We'll revisit this after those milestones are achieved." As they parted ways, Alexandra felt a complex mixture of pride, ambition, and unexpected trepidation. Her career trajectory had accelerated beyond anything she could have imagined when she first encountered Klaus Bergman in that New York diner. The arrogant billionaire who had once dismissed her was now offering pathways to global leadership. Yet as opportunities expanded, so did complications, particularly in her evolving relationship with Klaus himself. Their professional partnership had developed unexpected dimensions of personal understanding and mutual respect. The careful balance they maintained between collaboration and independence was increasingly nuanced, occasionally approaching something that transcended traditional professional boundaries without ever quite crossing them. Whatever came next would test not just her leadership capabilities, but her ability to navigate this complex relationship while remaining true to her own evolving ambitions. 1 year to the day since the groundbreaking ceremony, Alexandra stood on the factory floor of the fully operational Pennsylvania facility, watching precision machinery hum with quiet efficiency. German engineering merged seamlessly with American manufacturing. Innovation, a physical manifestation of the integration philosophy she had championed. "Production metrics are exceeding projections by nearly 12%, said Michael Chun, who had been promoted to operations director 6 months earlier. "Quality control standards are meeting Stuttgart benchmarks, and employee satisfaction scores are the highest in the company." Alexandra nodded, pride warming her chest as she surveyed the bustling facility. Workers moved with purpose between stations, the atmosphere energetic yet disciplined. The facility embodied everything she had envisioned: German precision implemented through American flexibility, creating something greater than either could achieve alone. "And Mueller?" she asked, glancing toward the executive offices where Dieter had established his American headquarters. Chun smiled slightly. "Still unmistakably German, but the American team respects him. He's learned to listen before correcting, to explain his reasoning rather than simply issuing directives." The engineering teams particularly appreciate his technical expertise. It was perhaps the most significant validation of Alexandra's approach, the transformation of a traditionally rigid German executive into an effective cross-cultural leader without sacrificing his core identity or expertise. The board arrives tomorrow for the official launch ceremony, Alexandra reminded Chun. Everything needs to be flawless. It will be, Chun assured her with newfound confidence. The American team understands what's at stake. We won't let you down. Chun departed to oversee final preparations. Alexandra took a moment to reflect on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. The chance encounter with Klaus Bergman had catalyzed a complete transformation of her life and career. From serving meals to overseeing a billion-dollar international initiative, she had navigated cultural complexities and corporate politics with an instinctive understanding that had surprised even herself. Her phone chimed with a message from Klaus, who had arrived in New York that morning. Board dinner tonight at Kingshof, 8 p.m. Important matters to discuss before tomorrow's ceremony. The choice of venue wasn't lost on Alexandra. The Kingshof was where it had all begun, the restaurant where a waitress had corrected an arrogant billionaire and changed both their trajectories. Whether Klaus had selected it deliberately or subconsciously, the symbolism was powerful. That evening, Alexandra entered the restaurant with a strange sense of déjà vu. The crystal chandeliers, the hushed atmosphere, the immaculate service, all exactly as she remembered, yet experienced now from an entirely different perspective. She was no longer the server navigating between tables, but an honored guest being escorted to a private dining room. Klaus was waiting alone, standing by the window in quiet contemplation. He turned as she entered, his expression warming slightly in the closest approximation of a welcome his reserved nature permitted. "Alexandra," he greeted her. "Thank you for making time on short notice." "Of course," she replied, noting the absence of the board members mentioned in his message. "Will the others be joining us?" "The board arrives tomorrow morning," Klaus explained, gesturing for her to take a seat. "I wanted to speak with you privately first." Alexandra felt a flutter of uncertainty as she sat opposite him. Private conversations with Klaus typically preceded significant organizational changes or challenging assignments. A server approached, not someone Alexandra recognized from her time working there, and poured wine with practiced precision. Once they were alone again, Klaus raised his glass slightly. "To successful integration," he said, his tone carrying unusual warmth. Alexandra touched her glass to his. "To breaking new ground." They sipped in comfortable silence for a moment before Klaus set down his glass and shifted to a more serious demeanor. "The Pennsylvania facility exceeds all expectations," he began. "The board has reviewed the performance metrics and is unanimous in its approval. Even Voller has acknowledged the success of your hybrid approach." "That's excellent news," Alexandra replied, waiting for the unstated, but that typically followed such praise in corporate setting. "Which brings us to the broader implementation I mentioned several months ago," Klaus continued. "The board has approved a global reorganization based on your integration model. All Bergman operations worldwide will adopt the hybrid structure over the next 2 years." Alexandra nodded, anticipating what might come next. "That's an ambitious timeline for such a fundamental restructuring, indeed, which is why the board has created a new position to oversee the transformation," Klaus said, watching her reaction carefully. "Chief Integration Officer, reporting directly to me, with responsibility for implementing the new organizational structure across all divisions and regions." Though she had half expected such an offer, the reality still took Alexandra's breath away. It represented a meteoric rise from cultural liaison to C-suite executive in less than 2 years. "That's a significant opportunity," she said carefully, "and an enormous responsibility. One you're uniquely qualified to handle," Klaus stated matter-of-factly. "You've proven your capabilities at every stage. This is the logical progression." Alexandra considered the implications. The role would place her among the highest-ranking executives in the company, with global authority and visibility. It would also require continued close collaboration with Klaus himself, and increasingly complex. A dynamic that blended professional partnership was something harder to define. "Before I respond," she said carefully, "may I ask a personal question?" Klaus nodded once, his expression revealing nothing. "When we first met, when I was serving your table and you insulted me in German, did you ever imagine we would end up here?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the carefully maintained farce slipped, revealing something almost like vulnerability. "No," he admitted quietly. "That night I saw only what I expected to see, someone beneath my notice. I failed to recognize your potential because I wasn't looking for it." It was perhaps the most honest self-assessment she had ever heard from him, an acknowledgement of his own blindness that night. "And now?" Alexandra pressed gently. "What do you see now?" Klaus met her gaze directly. "I see someone who has transformed not just this company, but my understanding of leadership itself. Someone who has shown that strength doesn't require domination, that adaptation isn't weakness, that excellence can take different forms in different contexts." The admission hung in the air between them, a bridge connecting their separate worlds. "The position," Alexandra said finally, returning to the matter at hand. "I assume the board has conditions?" Klaus nodded, seemingly relieved to return to more familiar business territory. "A 5-year commitment. Significant equity compensation vesting over that period. Extended relocation periods in key regions as implementation proceeds. And reporting structure?" Authority limits? You would report directly to me with full implementation authority across all divisions, Klaus explained. Regional CEOs would maintain operational control but would be required to implement structural changes according to your guidelines. It was an extraordinary level of authority, particularly for someone her age. Alexandra recognized both the opportunity and the potential for resistance from long-established executives who would resent her meteoric rise. I would need the unequivocal support of both you and the board, she said, public and private. Any daylight between us would be exploited by those resistant to change. You'll have it, Klaus assured her. The board understands what's at stake. Our future competitiveness depends on successful implementation of this model. Alexandra took a slow sip of wine, considering her decision. The role represented everything she had worked toward: influence, challenge, the chance to create lasting organizational change. Yet it would also mean 5 more years of sacrifice, of divided attention between continents, of personal life subordinated to professional demands. I'll accept the position, she said finally, with one personal condition. Klaus raised an eyebrow, waiting. That you acknowledge how far we've both come since that night in this restaurant, Alexandra said. You've changed as much as I have, Klaus. You've learned to value different perspectives, to adapt your approach, to share authority in ways that would have been unthinkable 18 months ago. For a moment, she thought she had overstepped, pushed their evolving relationship beyond professional boundaries. Klaus was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his typically severe features. A fair condition, he acknowledged. We have both evolved considerably. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson from this experience. That transformation is possible at any stage, given the right catalyst. It was as close to a personal connection as Klaus Bergman was capable of expressing, an acknowledgement that their professional partnership had elements of genuine human connection beneath the corporate structures. Then we have an agreement, Alexandra said, raising her glass once more. To transformation. To catalysts, Klaus countered, touching his glass to hers. The following day, the Pennsylvania facility's official launch ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Board members, local officials, and media representatives watched as the production lines demonstrated their capabilities. Alexandra moved confidently through the proceedings, fielding technical questions, highlighting innovative features, and acknowledging the contributions of both German and American team members. During the formal presentations, Klaus announced her promotion to Chief Integration Officer, framing it as the natural progression of Bergman Industries' global evolution. The board members nodded their approval, even Voller offering a grudging acknowledgement of her achievements. As applause filled the auditorium, Alexandra caught Klaus watching her from the side of the stage, his expression revealing a rare moment of unguarded pride. In that instant, she fully appreciated the extraordinary journey they had shared, from a chance encounter rooted in arrogance and insult to a partnership that had transformed not just their own perspectives but an entire global enterprise. The perfect reply that night in the Königshof had been more than a momentary victory. It had been the catalyst for genuine transformation, a single sentence that unlocked potential neither of them had recognized. As she stepped forward to acknowledge the applause, Alexandra reflected that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of courage, through willingness to stand one's ground with dignity rather than surrendering to intimidation or responding with hostility. In that seemingly insignificant choice lay the seeds of everything that followed. The arrogant billionaire and the fearless server had both disappeared, replaced by 2 leaders who had learned from each other, challenged each other, and ultimately created something neither could have achieved alone. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was something far more valuable, a genuine human evolution, imperfect but profound, continuing to unfold with each new challenge and opportunity. And in the end, that was the greatest transformation of all.